All right, well, welcome everybody to our final digital trends session of the semester. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mike Griffith. Usually I'm on the other side of this thing, simply introducing the sessions, but today I'm going to be running through some of the pedagogy related to classroom response systems. So we're going to start talking a little bit about the pedagogical theory behind using these things, how to get beyond the simple, what is X, and really move into sort of some more interesting questions. And then in the process of this pedagogical demo, we're going to be using the clickers that you all have in front of you. And then we're going to go behind the scenes for a while and talk a little bit about question construction and using these things in conjunction with PowerPoint, or in the case of my presentation, Keynote on the Mac. So the first thing we really need to talk about are question goals. And the information that I'm going to be using in terms of question goal construction comes from Beatty, Geraci, Leonard, and Dufresne's article in the American Journal of Physics in 2006 on building classroom response systems. Now these guys are obviously looking at it from a very technical perspective, but we're going to be extracting some of their theories to talk about. So we have sort of three content goals that we're going to talk about, and we're going to look at three sample questions, and each one of those sample questions is going to address three of their larger strategies for engaging student interaction. So we have this nice little triplicate repeating through the class. But the first thing we need to do is figure out a content goal. And that's directly related to subject material. What do I want my students to learn from the question? What is the exact subject, the topic, etc., that I'm trying to convey by using this question? And so that's fairly straightforward, right? But from there, they posit that we need a process goal on top of that. So it's not just a matter of picking up a specific piece of information. Now, what we should really be interested in is the cognitive process behind that piece of information. What critical skill do we want our students to develop in the process of answering this question? If I just ask my students, again, solve for X, then they're going to take any number of paths to that. They're just going to give me the answer, and then we're going to move on. I'm not really generating any class discussion, right? I'm not putting the students in a position where they perhaps consult with one another or get angry at me because of the type of question that I've asked them. And we're going to talk about all of these strategies as we move forward. And the third, and what I find most interesting about this collection and this theory, is the final step and what they refer to as metacognitive goals, which I think is a great term. And they define this as the perspective, the takeaway. What do we want the students to actually feel about the academic process? So we go from concept to skill to sort of the overarching relationship of the individual to the content that they're learning. And so in the metacognitive goal, in the case of our example here, they're asking, how do our students feel about learning physics, or the act of actually doing physics? Is it just rote memorization? I memorize my formulas and then I deliver on the test, or is there something more to it? So we're going to be talking about these goals in conjunction with a couple of questions. The tools that we're going to be using today are the clickers that you have in front of you. There's also a third style of clicker that some of you have. This is the new version of our green guy here. We'll be recording on both systems at the same time and displaying the results as we go. So when I open polling, and I'll let you know when, by all means, feel free to start pushing buttons at random. There are no correct answers to my questions, so have fun. So again, when you see the clicker in the top right-hand corner, it's time to respond. It's time to get involved in the process. So Geraci et al. Talk a lot about this concept of trolling for misconception, and I really like this. This is an exact quote out of their article, and I've actually seen it quoted now in other articles about classroom response systems, which I think is great. But the idea that what we're really interested in doing with these devices is putting the students in a position where perhaps they don't have all the information they need, or perhaps we are leading them down the wrong path to an answer that seems logical based on what we've presented to them, but then forces them to go back and really re-examine their fundamental assumptions. And so we're going to start with a question related to this guy here. Obviously, it's an optical illusion, so you know that I'm already in the process of making the results suspect. So I'm going to go ahead and open polling now. And I'm going to do that for both the turning point clickers. So when I'm opening polling for turning point, that will be up here. And for those of you with this device in front of you, I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And I'm also going to open polling over here on the rest of the clickers, and I'll show you those results once everyone has voted. All right, I see some responses coming in. Yeah, just either one. All right.
1 second here. Now on this clicker, this is different than what I'm used to using.
You should just be able to punch whichever button you...
You don't have to push go or anything like that.
Nope,
right?
just the button. There we go. Okay. And I'll vote on mine.
I didn't see the number.
All right.
So what happens if you press more than one time?
Press more than once? It depends on how you set it. Okay. You know, you can set the number of times people can change their answer. Usually it's, by default, it's 3. So that one's going to register. That's an HITT. That's registering on something you can't see. So now let's go over the results. So I'm going to go ahead and close polling on both of these. So again, for those of you using the HIT or the turning point clickers, our results look like this. And this is great. This is what I love about the turning point system, is that it's built right into my PowerPoint or my keynote presentation. We can see that we have a tie between the cube being against a corner and the cube being gray, of course, the more logical answer. Yes?
You said keynote, it's keynote and PowerPoint, right?
That's correct. Yeah. The nice thing about this little toolbar that we have up here, that will float over any application that you have open. And in fact, at the end of my session, when I export the data, I'll show you that the system takes a screenshot every time I close the poll, so I know exactly what question I was asking when this particular set of answers came in. So we'll look at that in just a minute. So these are the results as displayed by turning point. Let's take a look at the results displayed by HITT. So in this case, we had 10 respondents to the question, and most everybody thinks the cube is sitting in a corner, and nobody thinks the cube is confusing, which is excellent. We're a very, very savvy group in terms of our visual acuity. All right, so let's move on. So you can see how this process begins to build. Need to get rid of our results here. All right, so moving on. Our next question: identify this object. Now, this is. I'm not going to open the polls just yet. What is it? Right? Okay, is this a smaller part of a larger picture? Is this the entire thing? I'm intentionally obscuring the question. Obviously, this is a very simplified version of what we were talking about, but as we move along, you'll see that it develops. All right, so polling is open. And polling is now open over here as well. I've got 11 responses on the HITT clickers. I've got 4 on the turning point. So let's go ahead and close our polling here. Everybody thinks that we have a board, and let's see what we have over here. We also have a board. So 82% on the one hand, and what are we on the other?
Who are those outliers?
75%. Yeah. Well, I have to say that I must confess that I'm usually the outlier in these demos too. I just refuse to choose the correct answer, or I like choosing D when that isn't even an option. So again, we can see that we can keep the flow of the pedagogy itself moving. Let me close my results. So the question that we just looked at. The correct answer is actually a table. We were looking at a very small piece of this larger image. And so I've managed to fool you all, good for me. But now we can begin to talk about what the consequences of this question are. And so we're going to look at the first 3 instances of our pedagogical goals. Multiple defensible answers, presence or absence of necessary information, and unstated assumptions or deliberate ambiguity. So again, I produced a question that was intentionally ambiguous in order to, trick you, but also to set up the next question that I'm going to ask, right? So as a pedagogical style, we can use these systems to lead our students to certain cognitive processes. And we'll see a little bit later that that also can involve restricting them to certain methods of solving questions, or even getting them to come up with the best system for answering the question, rather than just, again, solving for X, which is what we so often do. So here we have multiple defensible answers. This could be any of those things that are in the list. Again, our perspective is skewed based on the angle that we have on the image itself. All right, so let's take a look at this question again. Now we have a different image, and we also know the correct answer. So we're going to go ahead and open polling again, just because I want to see what you guys do with it, really. So let's go ahead and open polling. Obviously,
You don't have your answers.
yeah, there we go. No, you just have to guess blindly this time. You see, to talk about leaving out necessary information, the answer choices are probably something that we should keep. All right, I'm going to vote for a board this time.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
The little light, is that giving me some sort of feedback I should be able to interpret, like my answer's been?
Yeah, if it green means your answer's been recorded. It's picked up the receiver and recorded your answer. Red means that it's not detecting a receiver. All right, so here we think it's a shelf or a board. Excellent. Everyone's taken my advice and voted against the proper answer. So again, we're already sort of thinking a little more critically about this. And here's our response grid for the larger sampling, 9 this time. Again, 11%. 33 went with the correct answer, and 33 went with their original answer. So again, we see how this evolves pedagogically. And if I go here, we'll see that, again, that's me. We'll see that, again, we're dealing with 3 more scenarios for using these in a pedagogical context. Now we're looking at reusing a familiar scenario. They're aptly titled, Oops, Go Back, and extending the context, right? So in the initial question, I set up an impossible to answer scenario, right? A scenario intended to generate discussion, in some cases anger, at the unanswerability of the question. But then I can go back and refine the question. And so the students are familiar with what's going on, and again, obviously my example is very simplistic. But so again, we're reusing the familiar, and we're going back to what we were looking at before. So we have the possibility for feedback built into the pedagogical process itself. So while the first question talks about, sort of exposes them to the limits on what they can do with the information provided, the next one gives them the opportunity to answer the question with a little bit more to go on. Now the third question is going to deal with a different concept. It's the same image, but now we've changed the question stem. What information would be most useful in identifying this object? So again, I'm going to open polling. Ooh, got a lot of responses on this one. And so let's see what it is that we think. So the location of the object, or the use of the object in the case of the turning point remotes. Let's see what we've got in terms of the HITT remotes. 92% thought the use of the object, and 8% thought the height of the object. So again, you can see that this is a very different question than the questions that I was asking before, but I was able to lead up to it through this series of pedagogical moves. Again, I gave you something impossible, I refined the impossible. Now we're actually talking about the strategies that we could have used in the first instance to actually identify our object and what it is we were doing in the first place. So these are the tools that our group talks about. Let me close my results, and we'll move on to this next triumvirate. Qualitative questions, strategize only questions, and reasoning questions. And so again, it was very interesting for me to see a group of physicists actually advocating moving away from quantitative questions to qualitative questions. The idea that these concepts somehow are bigger than just the rote memorization of the formulas themselves. As someone in the humanities, I was approaching this from a humanities angle, and then suddenly I see that these guys in physics are actually approaching it from much the same perspective. Critical thought is actually sort of our primary pedagogical use here. And so you can see that by leading up to this third question, and again, notice the third question also employs all of the strategies of the second, right? We're looking at basically the same question again, and we're using the similar context in order to generate this sort of class discussion. And we all had a lot of different answers to this third question as well, instead of the blind guess for bored, right? We started 90% of us saying it's bored, and now we're talking about how we can determine what larger thing that this smaller picture is a part of. So the final pedagogical tool here then concerns how do we generate and maintain our questions. And this is our question workflow. This is my version that I've sort of cobbled together from several different people's ideas. This was the best way of going about it. We develop our questions. We send our question out into the ether to get responses. Hopefully, we can get some cooperative work out of our student group. We collect and display our answers, so again, everybody knows what everybody else thinks. Again, we have a discussion about that, so we start from cooperation, we move to discussion, and then ultimately, we have evaluation and revision. So, and then we feed that back into the start as well. So not only is our pedagogical use a feedback loop, but also our question construction is a feedback loop as well. And what's great about using classroom response systems is we can actually evaluate a session's worth of questions as the last question within that session. I'm not going to do that because I'm afraid of what you might say. No, but again, we have this idea that the students can give us an instant idea of how they think, what they think about the questions, and then we can feed that back into our question development. All right, so the next part of this is going to be a little discussion of the actual building of these sorts of presentations, the technical perspective. But before we jump into that, does anyone have any questions about the pedagogy? Great. All right. Well, we're a pedagogically savvy group. Oh, sorry.
So you said that you can program it differently so that students can change their answers, or so how do you do that?
Oh, we can look at the setting for that. Absolutely.
You can actually program in so they can change it once, twice, 3 times. Yeah, that's up to you to build into the system.
Yeah, you can say they can never, so first response is the one they have to go with, or they have a certain number of chances to change.
Okay.
All right, well, the first thing that we can look at is actually the turning point bar. You've seen most of it here. If I mirrored my display, there are a few other menus, but for the most part, that's it. Let me go ahead and do that so you can see some of the behind the scenes on that. All right, so now you're looking at my presenter screen, and this is Keynote in the background. If we go into Turning Point, which I can't see the logo, there we go. Notice that we can now save our session that we just recorded in the class, and this will go right into our sessions folder in our documents. If I pull that up, so all the session information is here, and it's a Turning Point file. Notice I can also go into Turning Point. I can go into Turning Point and extract screenshots from the session that we just did. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is the 255 session, and it's going to put them right in our sessions folder. So now you can see every time I ask you a question, a screenshot of exactly what was going on my screen at the time that I opened and closed polling occurs. So I know exactly what question I was asking as the results are being displayed. So this is a really powerful tool, and the nice thing about it is that it floats up here no matter what we're doing. So unfortunately, the HITT tool doesn't do that. That's why I'm not using it on the same computer that I'm presenting from. If we switch over here to the PC, again, we're using a program called Acquisition here. And so this is doing basically the same thing. We have our question options that we can set. Notice that I was actually using 5 response questions for each of these, so you guys could have been choosing E on me the whole time. If we want to open polling, we do it as simply as clicking the green button here. Notice we have a timer, so I can add or subtract minutes as I want. And notice responses are starting to come in as people play with their clickers. Everybody go ahead and hit a button. Now this clicker is keyed in to be my professor remote. So once I close polling, I can click, well, I should be able to click on the correct answer and get that to come up, but it does not appear.
Did you register?
Yeah, it's registered. Oh, wait, it's not set probably to display correct answers. Let's see. And of course, show hide correct answer. There we go. So now I can change the correct answer based on my selections. All right, so that is an overview of the 2 toolbars for these systems. The other tool that I'm going to show you before I turn things over to Derek is the actual PowerPoint integration. I was using Keynote in my presentation because I like what it does with the animations a little bit better than PowerPoint. But we have a great integration between the Turning Point remotes and PowerPoint as well. So I'm not going to be using the HITT remotes for this next one. I'm just going to be showing you what exists in Turning Point. And in fact, we don't have a Turning Point receiver on here right now, so I'm just going to run through some of this integration. So again, the standard presentation format. Here I'm displaying the type of remotes that you can be using, just as I did in the first. Now what's nice about Turning Point is that whenever we get to a slide with a question on it, our toolbar actually pops up in the upper right-hand corner. Again, I don't have a Turning Point receiver set up here, so we're not going to see any responses come through. But what we can do is divide into teams, and it's going to automatically give us 50-50 results. And then we can go through a series of questions, whatever. Obviously number 3 is my choice. Again, we have this is the data that was generated the last time through. What's great about Turning Point is it allows us, should allow us, no, apparently there's an error on that slide. Anyway, will allow us to show our breakdown of the answers that we've given by the team that we're on. So it's great for doing things like we can divide by gender, or we can divide by sort of any thing that we can conceive of, and then go through and ask a series of demographic questions or content-related questions as well. What's nice about this Turning Point 08 is that it actually adds this toolbar into PowerPoint. So now we can insert any type of slide that we want directly related to, so if I want a 3D pie slide, I can insert that. I enter my answer text. As I enter my answers, it's automatically going to generate the next question. I can come over here and I can set the correct answer, and it's going to automatically mark the others as incorrect. And so all of this is built into PowerPoint directly. They're currently working on a version of this for Keynote as well. It should be out later this year, hopefully. So this will allow us to play directly within PowerPoint without having to worry about going to these toolbars that I was using in my presentation.